It's Patio Side Chats with Fernando Martinez from Chaparral Pavers with tips and advice on landscaping and gardening. Here's Fernando Martinez.
Hello, and thank you for being here. Thank you for joining me here today. Don't get too close. I'm just a little bit under the weather today. And luckily it's radio, so you shouldn't catch anything. But I'm feeling good enough to do a show today. I didn't want to miss a week. And, you know, what's been going on this week for me is this whole kind of green thumb thing where people come up to me and say, oh, I don't have a green thumb. I have a brown thumb or a black thumb, or I can't grow plants. So I wanted to make today's show regarding that, and we do several of these shows throughout the years. So if you don't hear everything that you want to hear today, keep tuning in, and you'll, hear some more advice as we talk about these things, because we're on limited time here. But I have my golden rule of 3 things that you have to do to have a green thumb, and it's really simple. I honestly think anyone could have a green thumb, I think. And even if you already have a green thumb and you love growing things, there might be, some advice in here or some motivation to, I can always use it, even myself, to think about. And I do sometimes when I do these shows, go out and say, man, I'm giving this advice out. I better get out in the yard and get out there and do it myself. Because sometimes, we get other things going on and we get really busy in our lives and kind of forget to do things and take care of these things. But when we do these 3 things that I'm talking about that anyone can do, and if you focus on them and you sit down and you just do them, you're going to have a green thumb. You're going to be able to have good luck with most plants, not all plants, and know kind of where you are in you're a beginner gardener. Are you an intermediate, type of gardener where you can grow certain things and maybe get the plant palette a little more diverse, or are you a seasoned, basically an advanced gardener? Then you could pretty much grow anything, and you'll know which plants are pushing the limits of what we should be able to grow in this area, and you won't have such a hard time. So the worst thing you could do is set yourself up for is trying to grow an advanced plant in an area where it may or may not really be or grow necessarily, and you're trying to kind of force it in there, and you're a beginner gardener and you're starting off with more advanced plant material. So kind of get in that group of where you are, and as you learn and as you become a more seasoned gardener, you can start upping the ante with the varieties and the types of things that you want to grow. And usually it's the really beautiful things that maybe grow in Hawaii, hibiscus, or you want to have plumerias, or maybe things that grow up north more in the, Washington, Oregon region, like rhododendrons, or, there's certain things that want to be in other areas. Gardenias come to mind, the most wonderful scent in the world, but they're extremely difficult to grow here. I'm not saying it can't be done, because it can, but I wouldn't start out with that as a beginning gardener, and you want to be able to have a good time and a good experience. And that's what I want for you, which is why we're talking about this here. So what are these 3 mysterious things that let you have a green thumb? It's watering, fertilizing, and pruning. And that's it. So that's why I say I think anyone should be able to do it. If you just pay attention to those 3 things, the watering, the fertilizing, and the pruning, and you don't leave something out. In other words, if you did pruning all the time and you fertilize all the time, but you never check the watering, something's going to go haywire. If you're changing the watering all the time and then you're fertilizing, religiously, but you never pruned anything, something's going to go haywire. So any of those things, those 3 things that you leave out, there's some things you're not going to have as good of an experience, let's say. If you do something in each of those 3 categories throughout the year, you should at least go from a beginner gardener into an intermediate once you have experience doing that. So what do I mean by watering? It's just really, because most of us have the automatic timers. If you're watering with a hose, that's great. You're retired, you can really get in there and be very accurate with what you're watering. You maybe want to give one plant more water than another plant. Most of us have drip systems for the plant material or automatic sprinklers for the lawn. And so, but what you have to do there is change the clock. So you got to be kind of in tune with the clock. The seasons change. And if you don't have a weather station or some sort of help with, a smart timer or something that's adjusting itself to the weather, that's going to be up to you. Now, having said that is actually one way to get out of having to do anything with the watering is if you get an automatic system that will be sensitive to the weather and change itself essentially, so you don't have to do it. Now, if you don't have that, or even if you do, because I have one by Hunter that I've talked about on this show before called a solar sink, it works within reason. It'll back it down as a percentage across the whole clock, but I still find myself going in there, making sure that it's adjusting the way I want it to adjust, and it won't water any more days than what I already have it programmed. So I'll go in there and maybe add days if I feel I need to, or take days away during the winter, or if it tries to come on too fast after a rain, I'll just turn the clock off and wait maybe a few extra days, even though the sensor would have let it come back on already. So there's still some things to do even with the smart timers. Now, when you go to fertilize, you should really remember that plants need food. They're only living off of what's naturally decaying in the ground and turning into natural compost and fertilizer by itself. So, or unless they're pretty new plants, whatever was left over from the nursery, fertilizing it. So once you plant your plants, I would say 3 months, 6 months later, there's going to be very little fertilizer left inside the root ball from the nursery. And if you're raking up the leaves all the time and blowing off and, mowing with a bag and getting all the green waste out of the yard, which is what most of us do because we want a nice, clean yard, you're eliminating a lot of that, what would be natural compost. Now, the birds are kind of flying overhead. They're helping out, fertilizing things. And that's how it happens in nature with the compost and the animals, and everything. And so if we eliminate some of that and, we're washing things off and raking things up, we're going to have to help those plants out with fertilizer, bagged fertilizer, essentially, that we buy and put out so that these plants will live and thrive and be beautiful. Now, usually plants don't die just because they don't have fertilizer. So they just kind of sit there. They look kind of peaked. Maybe they're not blooming as much. They just don't look vibrant green like they could. So the fertilizing is pretty key, but I guess you can get away with not fertilizing as much sometimes, or even if you forget, the plants can be very forgiving because you can always go out there and just start feeding today, and my kind of rule of thumb, 3 to 4 times a year, you should be doing something. And you can also mix fertilizers. So it doesn't have to all be one thing. And that's a very common question I get a lot is, what do I fertilize with? And my answer is, I want you to fertilize with what works for you, because everyone does it differently. There's any number of ways of fertilizing. It really doesn't matter how you fertilize. It matters less what you fertilize with, as long as there's no chemicals in there, or weed and feed or things like that you want to be careful with. But if it's just straight fertilizer, if it's a triple 12, triple 20, if it's pellets, if it's a water soluble liquid form, or if you want to do it on a hose end sprayer, if that works for you, absolutely do that. Now, the water soluble is released really fast, so you might have to do those more often. The little pellets, make sure that you check for homogenized, which means that all the nutrients are all in the same little BB pellet that's inside the bag. They're not separated in there. It's much easier when you get a homogenized fertilizer. And if it says citrus food and you want to put that on the citrus or the azaleas on the, because there is certain plants that like certain things. And if you're not a chemist, you can go buy those bags and that works. But if you had a triple 12 and you wanted to put on everything, definitely that'll work as well. So generally speaking, our area here on the Central Coast, the soils are very alkaline. And I'm talking about the pH of the soil, and whether you know what that means or not, but there's a rating of the pH level. And when you go high, it's considered alkaline, and it can be hard on certain plants, and they can have a tendency of their leaves to get yellow. It's also called chlorosis, or they go chlorotic. And then there's the other side of that would be the acid. So if you're acidic soil, there's a lot of plants, especially the ones that grow up north where you get a lot of rain and they're getting a lot of leaf drop from all the deciduous trees, and it can acidify the soil. And those plants like that. You can get an acidic type of fertilizer that will simulate that. And now you're getting yourself up more towards intermediate, closer to advanced type of gardener. Very simply, it doesn't really take a whole lot. It's experience mostly, I think, just going out there, being familiar, seeing what you love. If you really love a plant and you want to grow it, you're going to figure out a way to do it and to make that work for you. And that's how you become, that advanced gardener. And again, just following simple things like drought-tolerant plants. We don't want a whole lot of water, so that needs to be looked at and changed. And the most common thing that I see is the overwatering of drought-tolerant plants. I've done it myself. There's certain plants I know I cannot grow because I have other plants nearby or my drip system's coming on and it's watering. Or maybe it's an area where my lawn is curved and then the sprinklers are going over into the planter bed, and I would love to be able to grow, monkey flower or some of the, there's a hummingbird sage. It's a native plant that takes very little water. I planted like 7 of them because I absolutely love that plant. It's super fragrant. One grew, and it grew on the corner where I didn't even think it would but because it was kind of shady and it was almost going on the north side of the house, there's this full sun plant. But I left it there, and now it's thriving right there by itself, and I'm not going to add any drip or anything over by it because I know, it's doing what it wants to do. And so you kind of let the plants decide too a little bit as to what you're going to be able to do. And if you love them, you want to get them out there. I mentioned hibiscus. We planted some hibiscus in a yard recently, and I told the lady, you're for sure going to get aphids, you're going to get whitefly, there's going to be issues with this, plant. But to her, it was worth it because she's going to get those beautiful, gorgeous hibiscus flowers. And so, we'll spray for the bugs, whatever, and, fertilize it, make sure that it's healthy. That's another thing about fertilizer that I think sometimes people forget is that it will naturally fight off bugs and disease because the plant is healthy. So bugs and disease like to go for plants that are suffering from something. Could be overwatering, could be underwatering, could be lack of fertilizer, lack of nutrients. And so maybe it was never pruned. Trees can be huge on that. If they're totally let go and never pruned and never kept up, they can get quite large. They can grow these big giant cross branches, and they can damage themselves. There can be a lot of weight, So this is it. And again, it's just super simple: water, fertilizer, pruning, and the fertilizer is the key, obvious part of that. So think about when you have healthy plants, you're going to have less disease. You're going to have dark green. You're going to have a lot of new growth coming out. You're going to have lots of blooms and flowers. So whatever effort you put out to your plants, and if you're seriously thinking about saying, okay, I'm going to do this, I'm going to change the watering, I'm going to really stay true on fertilizing, I'm going to mark it on the calendar, I'm going to go out there, I'm going to prune, or I'm going to have my gardener do this pruning instead of just mow, edge, blow. I want this, and this pruned at these times of the year, whether it be fruit trees or even deciduous fruit trees can be, or ornamental fruit trees can be treated the same as fruit trees and pruned that way, because they technically are fruit trees, even though they're not fruiting, or sort of like a fruitless olive or a flowering plum or the ornamental pear trees. So be pruned often and pruned hard like you would a fruit tree. And of course, fertilize, especially trees. You can do the big tabs on the trees, or they have the fertilizer spikes. You can get those root feeders for large trees and keep them healthy, especially if you see them start to get bugs. I took my lawn out in my backyard, and I was putting pavers around and, road base, and I wasn't watering for a while, and I could see the tree suffering. It wasn't getting any fertilizer from the lawn, and there's no more, the sprinklers were cut off. And then all of a sudden I see aphids, starting to go on there, and it just all makes sense. It's just kind of how things work. So if you want to have a green thumb and you want to have a good experience with your plants, of course we all do. And especially if you spent a lot of money on landscaping and plantings, or if you did it yourself and you've got a labor of love out there, all this effort and energy, it's very well worth keeping it up and keeping everything looking nice. It's very rewarding too. So now, last thing on fertilizer is iron. So when the pH gets too high, that's what I was saying. We have high alkaline soils, and also our water is very alkaline. So and if you have poor drainage, if you have clay soils, or even sometimes I've seen the sand where it gets really hard packed and it doesn't drain, the minerals in the water can build up at the top of the surface. And again, very alkaline. So a lot of plants will have a hard time with that. Ferns, azaleas, camellias, obviously, hydrangeas, anything, even citrus trees, they can go chlorotic and they get yellow leaves on them. So if you see yellow leaves on a citrus tree, it's a high likelihood it's a high alkaline soil, it's lacking iron, it's in a chlorotic state, and there's a few things that you can do. You can lower the pH of the soil by putting an acidic fertilizer, and you can also add iron, and you can also, they have chelated iron where you can spray on the leaves and help it out. I've noticed boxwood, if you're growing boxwood plants or little boxwood hedges, they also have a tendency to go chlorotic and get yellow leaves on them, and it's the same thing. It's high alkaline soils, and the water, and maybe not as good a drainage as they'd like. The well-drained soils is going to leach out those minerals, and you're able to water more and kind of flush the soil, which will help lower that pH. Putting compost down, you can put gypsum down. And if the fertilizer that you buy, if there's sulfur in there or any of the metals, iron, manganese, those will help to lower the pH of the soil. So if you look at what they call acid fertilizer, you look on the back and read what the ingredients, what's in there, you'll see what is actually making it acidic. And then when you go into, let's say you look at your 12 or your 20, it says all purpose. But if you see those things on there, you see sulfur in there, you see iron in there, that's going to help to acidify without necessarily having to say it on the bag. So you can be that smart, savvy shopper. Now, let's talk about pruning. People, please, gardeners, hello, wake up. No boxes, no balls. There's no shape in Mother Nature that grows a box out of a plant. I don't know who started it. I don't know why. If it was a formal garden, that's fine. Hedges, maybe you've got these shapes, little pathways, round, perfectly round fountains. Formal gardens, yes, I get it. Box shapes, balls, that makes sense. But if you have a natural landscape, if you just have plants in your yard, just planted, 4, 5, 6 feet apart from each other and just in kind of random patterns or groupings, making boxes and balls out of these plants just absolutely does not look good at all. I know it's fast for the gardeners. I know they like to get the hedge trimmers out and just go. Maybe at a hospital or, a shopping center where you have, rows and rows of plants and hedges. That would, make it a necessity. But if you just have an average sized front yard, 30, 40 plants, backyard, 50, 60 plants, something like that, we should be able to do natural, what I call selective pruning. So please, selective pruning if at all possible. If it's too high maintenance of a plant where you feel like you have to hedge it and hedge it frequently, take it out, remove it. Do not be afraid to remove high maintenance plants. You will save so much in the long run, and you'll be much happier, and your yard will look much better. And plant dwarf, compact things far apart from each other. That's how you get low maintenance. And that's how you make it much easier for yourself to do natural shapes. I want to talk a little bit more about pruning on the other side of the break. Remember, if you want to hear any part of this show, if you miss it, or if you want to hear any of our radio shows, it's Chaparral Pavers on YouTube. So you just type in Chaparral Pavers on YouTube and you can catch all our radio shows there. We have a link, of course, on our website at ilovetocomehome.com. Okay, we'll be right back and talk about pruning on the other side of the break.
You're listening to Patio Side Chats with Fernando Martinez from Chaparral Pavers on California's Central Coast. Here on 1240 AM and 99.5 FM, KSMA.
Chaparral Pavers. ilovetocomehome.com. Imagine the flickering flames and warmth of a fire pit, soothing sounds of trickling water, decorative lighting, highlighting your landscape at dusk. Driveways and patios, not only functional, but a work of art. This is what Chaparral Pavers does for your landscape lifestyle. You'll love to come home. Chaparral Pavers. Visit us now at ilovetocomehome.com.
If you're thinking about installing a new paver patio or paver driveway, check out Chaparral Pavers online at ilovetocomehome.com. Serving the Central Coast since 2001, Chaparral Pavers will work with you to get it right and complete the job to your specifications, as customer service is king at Chaparral Pavers. Paver driveways are stylish and durable and guaranteed to never crack. If your old concrete driveway or entryway is a hazardous cracking mess, it's time to call Chaparral Pavers. Go to their website, ilovetocomehome.com. You'll find all the information you need. Check out photographs of past installations and reviews from Central Coast residents who have used Chaparral Pavers. And don't forget, all installations are guaranteed for the life of your home. So check out Chaparral Pavers online at ilovetocomehome.com. Chaparral Pavers, they'll make you love to come home. Now, back to Patio Side Chats with Fernando Martinez from Chaparral Pavers on KSMA.
And we're back. Okay, we are talking about how you can have a green thumb. So don't tell yourself you got a brown thumb or a black thumb or I can't grow anything. Yeah, it's really simple. I've broken it down into 3 categories: watering, fertilizing, pruning. And if you do something in each of those 3 categories throughout the year, several times a year, the more you do it, the more fine-tuned and better your plants are going to look. I'm saying 3 to 4 times a year. Even if you did it once a year, it'd be better than not doing it at all, of course. But 3 to 4 times a year, I think you'll have really good luck. Any more than that, you're going to have fantastic luck. Changing the clock, seeing what happens. So if something doesn't look that great, make the change. Do one change at a time when you're changing things, by the way. Don't say, oh my gosh, this plant doesn't look right. I'm going to fertilize it. I'm going to change the watering. I'm going to prune it. Because then you won't know what really happened. So change the watering first. See how it reacts. If it looks better, okay, you know that was it, or at least part of it. And that's what I do. I have a tendency to overwater. I think most people have a tendency to overwater. I'll just sometimes turn the clock off. So, and then wait, see what happens. Things look better. Take a couple of days off the clock, and you're good to go. So you see what happens. Then after you do that, fertilize. You're going to get some new growth and nice green leaves. If it gets too big over the next few months or whatever, or if you just want to shape it, which I highly recommend you do that early rather than waiting and making big, large cuts. Prune it up a little bit, and it's that simple. You're now a gardener. You're even if you're at the beginning level, and then the more you do it, the more you get used to it. You start becoming an intermediate gardener, and you start working your way into some more harder to grow plant material. By the way, if you want the easiest plant in the world to grow that anyone should be able to go, and you can tell yourself you've got a green thumb because I can grow this plant, it's succulents. Super, super, super easy. You hardly have to do anything at all. So keep that in mind. I love succulents. I love adding them in all my landscapes if I can, as long as the customer agrees. And you could basically you could break a branch off, drop it on the ground, and it starts rooting in and growing by itself. So think about succulents if you're having trouble and build your confidence up that way. Okay, now I promised you I was going to talk more about pruning, so let's get into it. Again, no boxes, no balls on naturally spaced out plants that aren't hedges. That's not trying to be a formal garden. It just much better to do selective pruning, which means you get in there and you cut one branch with a pair of pruners, go back past where you want it to grow to. So if it's right up against a sidewalk, go about 6-8 inches, a foot in, and cut one large branch. Do the large cuts before you do the small cuts, because those little tiny cuts, small branches, are going to fill in those gaps. So if you take out one big large branch, a foot back, you leave all the little stuff, do that 3 or 4 times on one bush, and you'll be amazed how much plant material comes off. You're now back off the sidewalk, and all those little cuts that you were going to hedge and that'll be growing right back next week will still be there filling in those holes. There won't be large holes, and that will be a much more friendly plant to have there, to be next to a walkway or somewhere where you're wanting to hedge it back from. And it'll take a lot longer for it to grow back out of that, and then you just go in there and do your selective pruning again. So, and you leave that shaggy kind of look, it should look like it just kind of grew that way. So in my opinion, the best pruning job is you go in there and you make nice big cuts, you give it a shape. It can be a roundish shape, or an oval or some sort of, you want it to look neat and groomed, but yet still kind of shaggy so that it looks like it could have possibly grown that way. Like, oh, that plant was just that size. I love pruning manzanitas because they're very easy to do that, and you kind of open up the center. Any cross branches where they're could rub against each other, or it looks really dense on the inside, you can thin out the inside with those large cuts. Like I'm saying, that's automatically going to take some of the height and the width out of it, because as you cut big branches inside the structure of the plant, those branches go up and out. So you're going to cut a lot of it out. Do that first before you make the small cuts. And then if you still see it looks, lopsided or something, and you're all done with the big cuts, you don't need it really to be that any smaller, then go ahead and do your small cuts after that. Now, again, take it out. If it's a large bush and it's growing all the time, you're having to prune it constantly, take it out. Save yourself the headache, save yourself the time. Oh my goodness, talking about time, we're out of time. Thank you for joining me today. Chaparral Pavers on YouTube. You can hear all the radio shows, and of course at our website at ILoveToComeHome.com. We'll see you next week.
This has been Patio Side Chats with Fernando Martinez from Chaparral Pavers. Go to ILoveToComeHome.com to find out more, or call 805-588-6917. And be sure and tune in next week at this same time for Patio Side Chats here on KSMA.